Hi class, it's Dr. Lindner. Welcome. In this video, we are going to be talking about connective tissue. It's a pretty big topic. In some other videos, I addressed the other three types of tissues: epithelial tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue. So when we talk about connective tissue, remember when we did epithelial tissue was a whole bunch of cells that were closely packed together, right? With very little extracellular matrix. But when we talk about connective tissue, we have cells that are far apart from one another, different shaped cells, and we have different fibers, but they're not so close together. So when you have cells closely packed together, that's epithelium. When you have cells far apart from one another with lots of extracellular matrix, that's going to be connective tissue. Okay. Connective tissue is highly vascular and it has a pretty good nerve supply, with the exception of tendons, ligaments, and cartilage. And of the three, cartilage is probably the least vascular, and then ligaments, and the best is going to be tendons. Tendons don't have the best. It's got some, it's not that great. Ligaments, not so good, and cartilage, even worse. Okay, so I kind of put it in order of, okay, if it's got some blood supply, this one will have the better of it. Ligaments not so good, and cartilage the worst. So that when these tissues get damaged and it's time for them to heal, cartilage is going to take the longest to heal, and then ligaments, and then you've got tendons that will respond the quickest. Just to review, in connective tissue, we have three primary categories. So connective tissue proper is one category, supporting connective tissue is the second, and then liquid or fluid connective tissue is the third. Now, under fluid and liquid, we're going to talk about blood. And with blood, we'll mention the red blood cells, and then we'll talk about white blood cells. Red blood cells are erythrocytes. White blood cells are leukocytes. Under supporting connective tissue, we have cartilage and bone. Cartilage and bone. Under bone, we'll focus on compact bone. And when we talk about compact bone, you'll hear me talk about the osteon. And under cartilage, cartilage comes in three flavors: hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Under connective tissue proper, there's loose and dense. Under loose connective tissue, we'll mention areolar, adipose, and reticular. And under dense, we'll talk about regular, irregular, and elastic. Now, connective tissue is situated throughout the entire body, but it's never really exposed to the outside surface like epithelial tissue is. Most connective tissue is vascular, with the exception of ligaments and cartilage. Tendons have a little bit of a blood supply, not the best. Connective tissue has sensory receptors for pain, for temperature, and for pressure. In terms of their primary functions, in terms of the structural framework, we've got bones, we've got muscles, we've got tendons, we've got ligaments. That makes up most of the structure of the human body. In terms of transporting fluids and dissolved materials, it's going to use blood in order to do that. In terms of protecting delicate organs, we have fat that does that. We have fat cells, or adipose or adipocytes. Connective tissue is also involved in storing energy reserves, and it does it in the form of lipids, adipose or adipocytes. And Connective tissue is involved in helping to defend our body from invading microorganisms, and it does that through white blood cells and leukocytes. And we'll go into more detail in these categories in just a little bit. Now, in terms of connective tissue, we said that connective tissue is made up of a bunch of cells. They're not closely packed together, and they have lots of extracellular matrix. Well, what is the matrix? What is this extracellular matrix? Well, it's made up of three components. It's got specialized cells, it's got extracellular proteins, and ground substance. And when we look at the extracellular proteins and the ground substance, these numbers 2 and number 3 is the matrix. Okay, that's the matrix. Connective tissue is made up of cells, proteins, and ground substance, but the extracellular proteins and the ground substance together, that's what makes the ECM, the extracellular matrix. Now, what is it that makes up the ground substance, right? So we have connective tissue and this ground substance. The ground substance can be either fluid, it could be more gelatinous, or it could be more solid. We have something in the body called hyaluronic acid, which is very thick. It's very viscous and slippery. Chondroitin sulfate, which is more jelly-like. And then we have adhesion proteins, fibronectin specifically. And these binds collagen fibers to the ground substance. So the body can have different consistency of matrix, from fluid to gel to more solid. And maybe you've heard of chondroitin sulfate in the past. Maybe you know someone that has degenerative joint disease or osteoarthritis, and they supplement with glucosamine chondroitin sulfate to help with the cartilage, which is more jelly-like, between the joints. Now, connective tissue, when we look at some of the different cells and the specialized cells that we can find there, first let's look at the first type of connective tissue that appears in the embryo, is called mesenchyme. And it's got stem cells. And stem cells can divide and multiply and give rise to other type of cells in tissues. Okay. We have some cells that end in the word blast, like fibroblast or osteoblast or chondroblast. So these are like immature cells, and they help to produce matrix. The blasts, these have the ability to divide, they can produce matrix, and the one that's the most abundant are these fibroblasts. These are the ones that are most abundant, and they are always like a permanent resident of connective tissue. They're always present. They're secreting hyaluronic acid, and that's kind of like the cement that helps to hold the epithelial cells together. Okay, then we have chondroblasts that are involved with cartilage, and then osteoblasts that are involved with bone. So whenever you see that word blast, it means that they're kind of these immature cells. They multiply, divide, and they can produce matrix. Now we have cells that end in the word cyte, like chondrocyte, osteocyte. Now, if you've done osteology in lab, or when it was covered when you did tissues in lab, what you should have learned is that osteoblasts produce the matrix. They're producing collagen, and they're producing calcium phosphates, and they're pushing out think of it as like the bone cement, if you would. And when the osteoblasts push out the matrix, that cement is going to calcify, it's going to harden. And when it calcifies, if this is an osteoblast and it's pushing out matrix, all the cement, and it's pushing it out, eventually all that cement is going to harden and it's going to get trapped in this cavity. And that cavity is called a lacuna. But now that this osteoblast is trapped and can't do anything, it evolves from an osteoblast into an osteocyte. So osteocytes, they can't divide. They are mature cells, they can't divide, and they can't produce matrix. They are mature cell. Okay. Chondrocytes, these are cartilage cells. And one of the things that chondrocytes are known to produce, and I'll go over these in a little bit, they're called MMPs, matrix metalloproteinases. Matrix metalloproteinases. I'll go over them shortly. Macrophages, this is a type of cell that evolves from a monocyte. So it starts off as a monocyte. It's always in circulation. It's always moving around throughout your blood vessels. And then when it sees some sort of bacteria or some foreign debris, it's going to engulf it. It's going to remove debris, engulf the bacteria, and it does so because monocytes become macrophages, and the macrophage is a large eating cell. It's going to engulf bacteria, engulf debris, and macrophages work by phagocytosis. Plasma cells. Plasma cells are associated with blood, and plasma cells are going to develop from B cells or B lymphocytes. And what plasma cells do is they're going to produce antibodies that are needed to fight against foreign substances. And they're going to produce antibodies known as immunoglobulins, like immunoglobulin A or immunoglobulin G or immunoglobulin M or immunoglobulin E. These are all different types of antibodies that the body can produce. Maybe some it produces immediately. Maybe some it produces later on, or a delayed type of reaction. In connective tissue, we have mast cells. Mast cells are a type of white blood cell, and it produces heparin. Heparin thins the blood. It produces histamine, and histamine dilates your blood vessels. Okay, so when you have some sort of damage in your body, let's say a sprained ankle, and your ankle is black and blue and swollen and is painful and it hurts, well, it's swollen because the blood vessels are dilated, they're opened up, so you can rush a lot of blood there. So when you touch it, it's hot, and that's because blood is over 100 degrees in temperature. And there's so much inflammation and swelling because of heparin being that blood thinner. Okay. Adipose, these are fat cells. And under a microscope, they kind of look like a squamous cell. Remember, they kind of look like this, but squamous cells have a nucleus in the center, whereas a fat cell looks like that, and it has a nucleus in the periphery. And the reason why the nucleus is in the periphery is that fat cells or adipocytes, they store, it should say, it stores sugar. They store sugar, and they store toxins also. So toxins are stored in fat cells. And as fat cells rupture, when the cell membrane rupture, those toxins leak into your blood and then they go into the liver. So when you do detoxes, you have to do it in a very responsible way so that these fat cells aren't breaking too quickly, releasing too many toxins in the body. If there's too many toxins coming out too fast that your liver can't handle, you get this spillover of toxins and free radicals throughout the body. Fibroblasts and adipocytes and mesenchymal cells, these are all the permanent residents that you find in connective tissue. So this is connective tissue, and here you could see some of these cells. You could see fibroblasts. We could see mast cells. We could see plasma cells. We could see our fat cells. We could see our macrophages. So those are the cells. And then we have some protein fibers like collagen fibers. That's a strong, flexible bundle of protein, collagen. And it's the most abundant protein in the body, collagen. So this is like for strength and stability. And then you have elastic fibers, which, unlike collagen, elastin is much more elastic, right? So we can find them in the skin that's flexible, and blood vessels that are flexible, and lung tissue that needs to be flexible. You can see we've got some white blood cells like eosinophils and neutrophils. We'll talk about these specifically when I get into blood and I break down the different types of white blood cells. And then you can see our ground substance, which is really the material between the cells and the fibers. It's made of water, organic molecules like high hyaluronic acid, chondroitin sulfate, glucosamine, and it supports the cells and the fibers. It binds them together and provides a medium for exchanging substances between blood and the cells. Fibroblasts are really important for healing and regenerating the tissue. They all work together synergistically. The ECM, that extracellular matrix, that's the stuff that's located between the connective tissue and the cells. And we know it's made up of fibers and the ground substance. And when I come back, we'll get into a little bit more detail about this extracellular matrix and how inflammation and chronic inflammation is very detrimental to connective tissue in the body.